Hi, everyone that's joining. We'll give it a couple minutes for people to filter in and we'll go ahead and get started. We'll get going and people can go as we are starting. So hello, everyone. Welcome to our first of the Ethics and Future Work webinar series hosted by the Centers for Health, Work, and Environment in collaboration with the Center for Bioethics and Humanity on the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus. This is our first webinar titled Ethics of Wearables in Occupational Settings. My name is Casey Torbin. I'm our Training and Events Coordinator here at the centers. And I just have a couple of housekeeping things as we start. And then I'll hand it over to our moderator and presenters. So this is our agenda for today. We're just going to do some introductions and housekeeping. Our presenters will introduce the topic just so that we are all on the same page as we head into our panel discussion. And then at the end, we will do an audience Q&A as well. Our learning objectives for today are to identify key ethical concerns associated with wearables in occupational settings, including privacy, employment concerns, discuss the harms and benefits of the use of wearables in occupational settings, and explore the ethical principles and real-world applications of the use of wearables in occupational settings. So just a couple of housekeeping. All participants are on mute and will remain that way throughout the webinar. Use the chat for any technical assistance that you need. I will be monitoring that. Any comments about the topic or communicating with other participants. If you have any questions for our presenters, which we will do during our Q&A at the end of our panel discussion, use the Q&A box and we'll be filtering through that. Closed captions are available as well if you would like to use that. And at the conclusion of this webinar, there will be a post-evaluation survey. It would be great if you could fill that out. And if you're looking to claim CE credits, we are offering CIH, CSP, and SHRM. And as well, the webinar is being recorded. Just a disclaimer real fast, the views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the opinions, views, or positions of the Centers for Health, Work, and Environment or the Center for Bioethics and Humanities. The speakers also reserve the right to choose which questions they will be answering during the session. They will not be answering any politically based questions as the focus of the discussion is on the ethical use and the research behind wearable technology. We encourage questions that align with the session's objectives, including the impact, benefits, challenges, and responsible implementation of wearable devices in various fields. And thank you for respecting these guidelines. So now I'd like to introduce our speakers, first starting with Dr. Rachel Topazian, who will be our moderator today. Dr. Topazian is an assistant professor in the Division of General Internal Medicine in the University of Colorado School of Medicine and a core faculty member at the Center for Bioethics and Humanities. She is interested in the intersection of ethics, technology, and policy in occupational settings. And her research examines the ethical structural factors that facilitate or hinder occupational health, safety, and well-being, and the implications for practice and policy. She holds a PhD in health and public policy from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. One of our two speakers today is also Ram Mekala. Dr. Mekala joined the National Safety Council in Illinois in November 2021. As a subject matter expert and program technical consultant for the MSD Solutions Lab. Prior to that, Ram worked as the Senior Injury Prevention and Ergonomics Program Specialist at Providence Regional Medical Center in Everett, Washington for 7 years. At Providence, Ram taught and trained hospital staff on safe patient handling and mobility. And before he arrived at Providence Health and Services in October 2014, Ram was a research scientist for more than 12 years at the Center for Physical Ergonomics, Liberty Mutual Research Institute for Safety in Hopkins, Massachusetts. For almost 2 decades, ROM's research has focused on human performance, specifically through the lens of work and exercise physiology using various non-invasive physiological modalities. Our next speaker is also Dr. Katia Costa-Black, and she is the Senior Manager for Education and Partnerships at the Oregon Institute for Occupational Health and Sciences and the Outreach Core Lead at the Oregon Healthy Workplace Center at the Oregon Health and Science University. In these roles, she oversees the total worker health education and training portfolio of the Institute and is tasked to build research to practice partnerships in the Pacific Northwest region. She also holds an affiliate faculty appointment at the OHSU PSU School of Public Health and the University of Pretoria in South Africa. And I will hand it over to Rachel. Thank you so much for joining us, Katia and Ram. We look forward to a great discussion.
Thank you so much, Casey, for setting us up and for doing that wonderful round of introductions. We are really excited to be having our first Ethics and Future of Work seminar, I think since 2023. And we have two wonderful speakers today who really have immense expertise on this topic and bring great practical perspectives to our discussion. So we're going to focus today on wearables that are going to be used in the workplace specifically for health and safety purposes. And Katia and Ram are going to start us off by presenting just a couple of slides with background on what we mean by wearables, the kinds of data that they might generate, and how to start thinking about some of the ethics of deploying these in real-world settings. So we'll start off with that background, and then we'll talk a little bit about the benefits that these devices offer, some of the concerns that have been raised, especially by workers or for workers. We'll talk about some of the big ethical considerations that come with these devices, and then talk about how to think about implementing these in the real world in an ethical and effective way. But I'm going to turn it over to Katia, who's going to pull up a couple of slides to give us some background on this topic.
Thank you, Rachel. Just going to start with my slides. Just making sure you have them there. You're able to see. Okay, just a second. Let me just. Are you able to see just the slide or the presenter view?
Yeah, we're seeing presenter view.
Oops. Okay, so here we go. So it's really a pleasure to talk about this topic. I would say I'm no subject matter expert in ethics and bioethics, but I've been passionate about ethics since early in my career, some 20 plus years ago. And I'm going to kind of share with you a bit of my perspective on in my ethics framework. And as I said, this is a really hot topic, and I really appreciate the invitation. And I also appreciate the collaboration to speak about this topic with my colleague Ram and the National Safety Council. This is going to be an awesome conversation, and I invite you all to put your questions and discuss with us this topic, which is pretty much in the minds of many people working in safety at the moment. So before I begin giving you my main concerns and questions, I want to kind of highlight that what I bring it to you in this conversation is really a conversation about what is out there, what is available out there. But in order to inform you with the best scenarios on making ethical decision-making for practitioners and employers, to be really becoming familiarized with what is out there as technology goes, I'm going to kind of give you what is my main analysis, my analytical view of looking to the use of wearables from my ethical perspective and practitioner perspective. So I will describe which wearables we're going to be focused on today, mainly because there are so many types out there. So I'm going to really narrow down to the areas and expertise that both Ron and I can really answer the questions and discuss ethics. And I'm going to also describe a bit on when and where we should start thinking on the adoption of these technology. So before beginning this conversation, I think it's very important for me to be able to share with you where I stand in terms of my perspective and which framework I use for my own decision-making, ethical decision-making. And pretty much my ethical framework is really informed by my early adopted background in ergonomics and human factors ergonomics, which really is a human-centered design perspective. And I'll be discussing the use of any technology for this perspective really embraces the idea that we are asking the questions about designing for whom and really look really deeply into the benefits for the users. And from the human factors and ergonomics perspective, I also embrace the idea of designing for purpose. And when we're thinking about that, we know there are a lot of wearables out there and being driven by a purpose in terms of mission and vision for determining when they should be used. It's a very important part of being a practitioner in human-centered design. And the three kind of core principles guiding us to motivate to adoption of technology is really looking to efficiency, comfort, and safety as really the core values for adoption of technology. And the second practitioner point of view that I want to highlight here, and it comes into full fruition with my position at the moment at the Oregon Healthy Workforce Center, where I am representing Total Health Centers of Excellence in the Pacific Northwest. And I want to highlight that from my perspective, this framework of Total Health, a comprehensive way of advancing health and safety and well-being, really provides a foundation to make decision-making ethics that really allows practitioners, employers, union members, and all stakeholders and all employees to really envision a better and safer work environment. So with the Total Health perspective, the three key aspects that I want to really highlight is that really calls my attention is that we are driven by science development, not technology development. And I mentioned early that I want to make sure that we are discussing issues that are coming out from evidence-based practices. We want to make sure that we are discussing this according to what we know as results and not really based on data that we know. So this is really the framework of Total Health. But another one that is really emphasized is one of the essential core elements for implementing a Total Health approach in any workplace is the idea of maintaining confidentiality and data privacy, which is going to be a big discussion we're going to have later on. So I want to kind of emphasize that this is a really essential element for Total Health. And the third aspect that I want to emphasize with this perspective is the idea that we really have a central piece of action plan around Total Health that goes with hand in hand with the idea of do no harm. And that is really important that we consider which solutions we're bringing to workplace, which workplace interventions can really advance health and safety and well-being. And the question about who is going to be damaged or not, or is this going to be no harm for everyone? So that's really an important core principles and perspective that I want to make sure that I highlight. So just to give you kind of a definition that is mostly accepted around, this definition, definitely there is some other ones out there. You might not see, we don't have a consensus on what really is, but this is an acceptable one. So wearable technology, also known as wearables, is a category of electronic device that can be worn as accessories, embedded in clothing, implanted in user's body, or even tattooed on the skin. The devices are hands-free gadgets with practical uses, powered by microprocessors and enhanced with the ability to send and receive data via the internet. So these devices are able to connect to internet in order to collect and send data and receive the information that can be used for smart decision-making. And these wearables are, we know that there are very important information coming from a lot of this technology coming in the Internet of Things, and how these are going to motivate the market, how this is, people are utilizing this at different ways. And I want to emphasize how we're going to be talking about this in the framework of health and safety, and really trying to narrow down a bit more on the applicability in occupational settings. So in occupational settings, it's important that we talk very specifically about what these devices are for. And one, this is really not all the extent of all the application of wearables, but these are just some few examples. And these three examples really are the ones that are dominating the market at the moment. So we see wearables used for health monitoring for illness prevention. This is very common, and this is not a new use of wearables. This is definitely being in the market for quite some time. And we see tracking sign, the way they work is that they're tracking vital signs of individuals, such as heart rates, sleep patterns, and physical activity levels. And then the second application is the safety enhancements for accident and injury prevention. These are also not new in the market. They've been used for a very long time, and they are the devices like smart helmets and vests that can be monitoring environmental conditions, the temperature, air quality. Some of them are fatigue monitoring sensors, or some of them are worker movements to prevent accident. And either the sensors beep when workers get closer to any kind of hazard that can be lead to an accident. So these are the ones that are very common and already being used, well established in many industries. The third one is a little bit more in the new side, and ergonomics for prevention of musculoskeletal disorders. The amount of wearables that are coming in the market is increasing. In the last 10 years, it's been really a booming of these types of wearables. And in this particular case, the objective is to provide feedback on postural risks and supporting the optimal joint position, joint function when performing manual work to prevent musculoskeletal disorders. And I'm going to describe what they look like and how they do. So just to really specify, with the wearables for fatigue monitoring, which I mentioned that this is something that has been used for a while, you see there that there are the wearable devices. They are three types, basically. One type can be the wearable devices that are used for electroencephalography sensors, and they monitor the brain activity that relative to fatigue. The second category is the wearable devices that use cameras to monitor visual fatigue cues, and especially with regards to eye movement. The third category is the fatigue monitoring that uses activity and sleep data from wearables to calculate potential impairment and fatigue levels. This is really chronic fatigue prevention. And with the application you see in the bottom there, that are really specific more for shift work, job that requires alertness and other cognitive demands, and the types of industries: transportation, aviation, military, and first responders. This second group and second category of wearables to prevent musculoskeletal disorder is the one that I mentioned that are kind of more new to the market, and there's a lot of questions about regulations about this. And the two main categories of wearables for preventing musculoskeletal disorders are the exoskeletons or exosuits, and they aim to assist the users in lifting in terms of reducing the load associated with holding and also with holding certain tools. The second one is the motion sensor device, and they detect the risk of postural awkward position with bending and twisting. And they can also combine different risk factors in their analysis to give a more comprehensive picture of postural problems and environmental issues. And then they can really be about the behavioral aspects of biomechanics and movement performing manual tasks. So for high risk manual type of work in terms of ergonomic risk, these are the most common type of wearables used, and the types of industries is manufacturing, warehouses, healthcare, and construction. With the exoskeletons and exosuits, there are a lot of experts talking about this subject. I share with you one of the publications that I find very useful for anybody working and want to know a little bit more of the history behind what are the agencies are doing, what kind of consensus that we have. So the ASTM International Committee F48 defined as exoskeleton as a wearable device that augments, enable, assists, and or enhance motion, posture, or physical activity through mechanical interaction with the body. They can be very complex to evaluate in terms of usability. But I would say that exosuits and exoskeletons are similar. Exosuits are really primarily softer than exoskeletons in terms of they have a more elastic structure that fits better the human body. And it's useful to think about these both exosuits and exoskeleton as kind of smart personal protective equipment. And you can also think about them as performance augmentation and amplification devices. That's a good way. And the resource that I mentioned of this committee that he has been building consensus around creating a standard on exosuits and exoskeleton. And it's important that we clarify that the application for these wearables is really becoming a boom in different industries. One industry that's being really utilized is construction. And employees working in logistic and warehouse is another one. And whenever workers are doing overhead work and loading and carrying with tools and mobility, that's pretty much what we are referring to. And in the publication of the this particular publication in the Occupational Ergonomics Human Factors Journal, there is a list of different perspectives on when and not to use, but also the considerations for anthropometric data for different populations. That's a big consideration on identifying standardization for standard for the use of wearables. So another thing that this document provides is really the understanding on the side of consumers, industrial and medical, military, and emergency management sectors, how to really incorporate the use of this and consider the different population that is using, considering also assessment of system usability, and also considering the assessment of system ergonomics and system safety. So that kind of gives it, and also there is a discussion about training on using these devices. So this is, and then so I didn't want to bring it the entire spectrum of what these are because it can be really big, and I want to kind of go into the discussion about the ethics and how can we really make sure that when we are adopting all these products, all these technology, we are really looking into the benefits of them and also the what can go wrong. And so in the literature, there's out there a lot of perspectives on pros and cons. And I highlighted here the perspective from the human-centered design, where we're looking to what it means, data, and for me as an ergonomist, looking to what these devices can do is a very exciting moment where I spend a lot of time in my life doing assessments in ergonomics and doing risk assessments and seeing how advanced these technology can lead us to more accurate data, more information about cross-population, and also specificity in terms of job tasks. So that really is exciting. And also the other part that is very exciting is that the data is being used to improve and enhance existing programs in safety and in wellness, including ergonomics programs. So that's a really good benefit. The other ones is for Some of the wearables has been used for really getting workers to be motivated to do the work and be engaged on making the task safer. So that is also a positive side. On the negative side, there are issues still about fit and comfort for different population. There's issues about how you embrace these technology, considering aspects of safety culture that can impact on the adoption. And issues of cost, they're still costly, some of them, compliance barriers. And the big one that we're going to discuss on the Q&A is the data security and private issues that I know that Ron also will discuss this. So my final slide is just to really give you kind of trying to make sense about what is out there and really encourage you to think about. There's so many business out there that wants to make the right decision making on adopting these wearables. But I think the most important thing is to think about really center your decision making around the core ethical value, which it is to do no harm to people. And in order to do that, you need to look at risk more holistically and systematically considering the physical, the psychosocial environment, the personal health, and build consensus around the pros and the cons of this technology for each scenario, and especially with consideration of the users. And one way to do this is also to build capacity on what this technology really is and awareness about it. And with any other, just like any other safety practices, we also need to develop a code of practice that can help the ethical decision-making process. So we're going to discuss some standard and regulations that might help in that ethical decision-making. But as you know, that is not enough to make the right decision. So thank you. And Ron, I'm going to stop sharing and you can do your talk.
Can you guys see my screen? Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Katia, for that introduction. I'm just going to go a little bit in terms of, almost 30 years back, I should say 20 years back. This was my last slide in where I was a guinea pig. That was me. If you look back, right, wearables, we have, a lot of people, used to collect the data at the lab or, the heart rate monitor, you have the oxygen consumption, you're measuring the blood pressure during work, and of course, you're monitoring the brain while doing some physical activity. And then, researcher is gonna, get the data, and then the researcher is gonna talk to the guinea pig and, hey, we are collecting this data, and you go through all these IRB and all that, and then you get this information, all these wearable sensors, I should say minimally invasive, I should say. But what you're doing is you are collecting quite a bit of data with respect to the task in question, right? Then, you start sharing with this. That has been a traditional model in terms of the wearable sensors, right? And even at the workplace too, you go to the workplace, you collect the data, you talk to the worker, and of course, when the laptops came in or the iPads came in, you go and collect the data. It became a bit of more granular way of collecting the data, real time at the field. So things have changed, right? From the past to the present. And it's just look at the nowadays, even at the home level, right? We talk about everything is, it is so smart sensors. Everything is built, our homes are built in some smart sensors, and so life has changed quite a bit, I mean, and of course, we are saying that, hey, every provider says that, hey, all your data is, secure. We're going to provide it in the cloud. So this is unfortunately or fortunately, the life we live in, right? So, just now, if you go back to the workplace again, you're collecting the data through smart sensors, right? and you have this AI powered risk assessments. It can be, AI and IoT, that is artificial intelligence of things, and you're trying to, calculate the risk prediction, all this computer vision, ML, all these approaches you're taking place, and you're collecting the data. You're trying to integrate with respect to the management systems, and then, of course, you're integrating the data, looking at the cloud-based data for storage. That means, you're not only talking about the storage, securing the data, sharing the data. And obviously, we have, as a worker, I'm sharing the data, rather the supervisor or the ergonomist or EHS manager is collecting all this data. So that's been a typical change all of a sudden we see nowadays, right? But as a guinea pig or as a worker, my question is, why is my data collected? Okay, what type of data is collected? Will it be used against me? This is one of the questions which people have been talking about. Who owns this particular data? Will it be shared with me or someone else? If I am using a third-party sensor, to collect the data and the algorithms, then, I am worried about, who is doing all this, right? As a worker. And who is handling the data? Is it the supervisor? Is it my senior C-suite? And where is this data being stored? And how is the data stored? How long is the data being stored? All these questions are coming in place in terms of the privacy and, ethics. And what are the regulations that I can protect myself from? All these things, there was a time, if you look, I think Kronos did a study in 2014 looking at, we collect on the wearables. They said, well, benefits outweighs risk. That was one of the things some of these participants said. But nowadays things have changed. There is so much awareness of the risk, with respect to collecting the data from the workplace. So as a researcher, if you look at the digital health framework developed by UC San Diego, it's a very good way, and a lot of studies are being now making use of that health framework in developing their studies. And of course, it's developed for the digital health researcher, but also it can be used by the, third-party solution providers, ethical boards, clinical personnel, potential study participants, all this, so there is a framework which, people can look into in terms of when you are collecting the data or when you want to be a participant in the study. And of course, not to mention the last and the most important one, EEOC came out with the wearables in the workplace. What they are saying is what data wearables collect, including their accuracy, you're looking at validity across the different protected bases. You're talking about age, sex, gender, and, the pregnancy and genetics, all that, the protected bases. And then how is this data being stored? Again, this is a huge issue. And whether and how those data are used in employment-related decision-making, including whether their use impacts employees of different protected bases differently. So these are the main issues which we are dealing with the present wearables or the so-called smart sensors. So this is the short and sweet from my side. And then Rachel, go ahead with your Q&A. So thank you.
Thank you to both Ram and Katya. I think that was a really helpful overview of this topic. As you can see, there's a lot of different issues and a lot of ethical concerns that we need to think about as we think about rolling these out in the workplace. So I want to start out by digging in a little bit more into some of the potential benefits of these technologies. And I think you both alluded to this a little bit, but I wonder, maybe Katya, if you wouldn't mind starting us off by giving us a little more detail on where you see the benefits of wearables in your work. Are there specific fields or occupations and examples where you think this is really the most beneficial?
Yes, definitely. There are specific. So I mentioned a few, but I want to kind of give a little bit more examples on the real benefits of this. So there are so many occupational settings that are benefiting from using wearables for a long time. The first one that I can think about is the heat sensors that really protect workers from heat stress. The one that is being used for a long, long time that is direct benefit and impact is really those transportation sensors to alert drivers that are to prevent them to be in an accident. We're looking to the eye movement monitors. And there are other ones, but I think one of the things that I consider in my practice relevant is to think about the type of risks that industries that are facing. And I think the ones that have the most high risk for fatalities and accidents are the ones who are benefiting the most. And these sensors that are being used for that purpose. The other area that I think that is not yet utilized, but it can really benefit in a very particular way is the exoskeletons and the exosuits with consideration for population that are getting older in the workplace and how we are going to have to embrace this aging workforce, the exoskeletons and exosuits that can really decrease the joint effort and the really aspects of function and manual handling work that really supports all workers to perform the manual types of tasks that we need them to perform. That is really another area of benefit from ergonomics. And I think if we utilize some really key principles that especially ones related to universal design, inclusive design, that really, really will bring benefits to most workers and protect them from any kind of discrimination, and I think that's the way to go in terms of thinking about the benefits.
Yeah, that's a really helpful framework to think about high-risk fields or certain populations that we could work with where these might be most beneficial. On the flip side of that, right, there's a lot of concerns, and I think you both alluded to some of these. There's kind of practical concerns, there's ethical concerns. Ram, could you speak a little bit to the kinds of concerns that you've heard from workers or that you anticipate you might hear from workers?
I think definitely, I mean, that's actually a good question, because if you look back, the major concern nowadays is the data collection and the privacy. If you look at the quite a few studies, which, just an example, in 2019, I think there is a publication from Dr. Jesse Jacobs from Liberty Mutual, my previous employer. They looked at employee acceptance in terms of the wearable technology. And definitely you have, the employees are concerned about the personal information being collected. That's one of the things, might not be from that study is more of employee acceptance, but, the one of the things is that, how can we get a buy-in from the employees? And a lot of, workers think that, there's lack of control in terms of protecting the personal identifiable information, from the wearables, and if they're concerned about the sensitive data, like, you're looking at the health metrics and the location tracking, even the brain activity. If you look at the neuroergonomic side of it, people collect data from the, to understand what's the cerebral responses. That's a huge issue. And also you have the consent and transparency, still we don't have a, if you really want to get a buy-in that, you need to have the consent. And also, you need to be transparent in terms of how you're collecting the data and where is being stored and why are you collecting the data and who handles the data. That kind of a trust that is important as well. And also they're concerned about the discrimination and the bias as well. Again, you have the protective base in terms of the race, you have the color and the religion, age, you have the disability aspects of it too, and the sex. So all these aspects, they fear that, this wearable data, because you're talking about the data in terms of the smart sensor collecting. So there was a time, as I told in the beginning of my career, it was only between a researcher, or even if you're buying some instrument, from outside a third party, you are not sharing the data with the third party in a sense in that time. But things have changed. You don't know who is collecting the data. Are they collecting and they're giving that information for a training model they're developing for AI? And also medical conditions, what if they're collecting certain data, for a pregnant woman, and how are they being used, so those are the issues too. Again, going back, even the concerns, even if we extend, right, job security, and some people are worried about the performance evaluations. How are they collecting data, or rather collecting the data, but how are they being used, in terms of, are they doing to police me in terms of my performance? That's another issue too. So, and not only that, I think both Katia touched upon that in terms of the accuracy of the data or the validation of this particular data. Yes, you can buy whatever the product the solution provider is, giving it to you, but before you buy the shiny object, look at the use cases, ask for those use cases, and see what is the reliability or the validity of that. What are the security features of it? All those things definitely come into picture. So
yeah, quite a range of concerns, and I want to dig in a little bit on the privacy point. But before we turn to that, I wonder if you could speak a little bit to how some of these ethical concerns that you've raised balance with practical concerns about, the cost of deploying these, or, maybe kind of comfort with technology. How do you see some of these ethical challenges in relation to some of these practical ones? Are they just apples and oranges? Are people more concerned about one or the other?
I think it's more of the way I look at it is more of, even if you are, that's why I kind of, in the very first I said about the Jesse's Jacobs study from the Liberty Mutual, the employee acceptance. Can you make them comfortable that, this particular device is, you collecting the data, but not to, penalize you, but, having that information right, and getting the buy-in, get the feedback from them as well, before you deploy it in the workplace. So that is very important. And also making sure, again, to the worker that, yes, this is the person who is collecting the data. This is the person, where is it going? Is this going to be shared with, the other coworkers? All this, as long as you have those guardrails in place, I think, practicality will be very easy. I'm not saying that that's the foolproof way, but at least that gives, because at the end of the day, you are putting this sensor on a frontline worker, because you wanted to, of course, you have a good notion of collecting the data to make the, work better, so that, looking at the health and safety aspects of it too. But there is always a, other side of it that, this can be misused. So as long as you give that comfort in terms of the guardrails, I think that can be the best way to go, in my view.
Rachel, can I add something to this?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So from the practical side, I really like this question because there is still a lot of unknowns and there is still a lot of awareness, especially for leaders and early adopters, and for employees to really trust this technology and really adopt this technology. You would say that data privacy is not an ethical concern, it's a practical concern. And I would also suggest that in order really to build that trust in this technology, we really need to ensure that there is some sort of regulation for the tech industry that is developing these products. I also want to put out there, this is really my own perspective of that, but I also want to put out there as a practitioner that I see these wearables the same way as we see regulations for putting medical drugs in the market. And it needs to be regulated and needed to be systematically tested, and across different populations. We still need more research to do on many of the testing of these wearables. And as I mentioned before, if we adopt the view that we want to really make sure to bring to workplace what we at least an evidence-informed solution to preventing musculoskeletal disorders or anything like that, we do need to consider what we know and what we don't know. And we still have some unknowns. So on the practical side, I am a little bit resistant to just embrace everything without yet a full understanding of the efficacy, and also really looking to the users who these are benefiting. And another thing that can push practice to adopt this and really embrace the idea of technology use is really to make sure that we're protecting workers in different areas. So not just the discrimination side. So the European Union has done issues about general data protection regulation and for protecting consumers of these kind of products. And I don't know in the United States only. I know that from one publication that I read, there is information coming from the California Consumer and Private Act, and they talk about introducing the considerations for employers when they're managing that kind of worker data and the sources of data and how far they can collect that data, and really putting some limits and regulations to protect and treating workers as consumers of these products. And I think this is a way of safeguarding the data usage that Ron mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah, I really love the way you framed that of, like the data privacy questions are not just ethical questions, they're really practical questions. And making sure these devices are designed and implemented in an ethical way will also help make sure that they're effective, right, for their health or their safety aims. I wonder, maybe we can pivot a little bit to talking about some of these privacy issues. And Ram, you raised a number, I think, of really important questions about what should happen to the data and who should have access to it. What do you think some of workers' specific concerns are when it comes to who has access to their information? Is it about their employer having access to it? Is it about it being used in discriminatory ways? Kind of what's the main concern, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think, well, as I mentioned, because you're collecting the data from the worker, you're talking about the access. One of the things is that, we need to have considerations in terms of only authorized personnel. If I am an ergonomist, if I am collecting the data, I need to have that, in the sense, the worker should know who, and only, going back to Jesse's study too, that limited the access to that particular data. It's more of a need to know basis, who sees that information, who will, work on it, who will, further process the data. Those are important. So that means, you have to have a transparency. You need to have the informed consent. I mean, in the research side, if you go to the, the university side or aspects of it, you have certain IRB. And, whenever the solution providers or these, people who are developing these devices, I'm not sure, whether we have a strong IRB protocol, so that's why I think the UCSD digital health framework really helpful. Apart from that, yes, third party can say that, that we already have this, you have this we have a regular, we have this consent form, but there are also some studies which show that it seems it typically takes long time to really go through this particular language before you sign, as a participant or a work, as a subject. So there is a lot of, the language in terms of the informed consent is helpful too, and again, fully inform that employee what data is being collected, how it will be used, who will have that access and how long it will be stored. These are really, really important, and do we have a policy, written policy at the workplace, in terms of, all this data collection, handling, and what are the rights, and I think, Katia said about the California one, CCPA, and also I'm sure Colorado also has some strict regulations in terms of that. And of course, we have this HIPAA, and also, UK and Europe has this, general, the GDPR. So there are some regulations. So those are the things also help, so apart from all that, you look into the ADA in terms of, because, you are securing the data, especially you're collecting the health data or disability information, that can be an issue too, So apart from that, the considerations in terms of the non-discriminatory use of the data, that is important, don't use the data, to, the pregnancy or the chronic illness. I think there was one study, which I apologize, I don't know the exact, but other than that particular, they were monitoring, I think a pregnant lady and the temperatures of, because of the pregnancy, and they had some issue with that, with respect to so-called normal, temperatures versus, the person who is pregnant. So those are, don't use against the parties, those workers or the participants, that's one thing. Going back to, again, third party. Yeah, third party, we talk about the AI stuff is black box, you really don't know. But if you're using some AI-driven models or AI-driven wearable sensors, we need to know how is this being collected, what is being used. It's not against, there are enough studies which are showing that, there's a bias against, the race and the color in terms of, what data comes out. So those are the things, are important as well. And the last thing is definitely employee rights. We need to have some policies in place, in terms of, protecting their, so that you don't get into the, into the privacy aspects of it. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I want to pick up on one of the things you mentioned about using the data in discriminatory ways. And it seems like there's concern from workers that it could be used in discriminatory ways at their current workplace, right? Maybe that they could be passed over for promotion, or your data could be used against you in some way. We have a question from the chat that asks about how this kind of data might influence future hiring. So, could workers be concerned that this might affect their future employability with another company or another employer?
yeah, that's where I think that federal one, EEOC, came out with that, and that's a very good one. Even they are looking at that, not only that kind of information, but also return to work, also those aspects as well. So that guidelines is pretty good, in my view, because we don't have strict, we don't have foolproof regulations per se with respect to, there's so many, some of the wearables are coming and going, so you have all these things coming in place, not only the validity and reliability of this particular tools if you are using for certain purpose, but also, do they have any guardrails in terms of that? So I think EEOC, at least from my side of it, I'm pretty happy about the way the language is written, but there are always, some issues which can come up and they can update it. But I still recommend to look into the EEOC, the federal guidelines,
Yeah, can I comment on that also, Rachel? So there are aspects of this question that I think touch many things, and there are really strong suggestions that the direct supervisors are the gatekeepers of this data, and how they're going to train supervisors in using that data and supporting worker safety. These concerns are valid, and there is a communication coming from different departments, different protections of workers that are really speaking on how to do that. But to me, the first step to think about this is to thinking about communicating the merits and the facts of wearables, and that goes hand in hand of really discussing with employees what the purpose of these devices are for. And once you get that clear, then you really have to do a process of selecting when you are understanding why we're doing, how we're doing, and by whom this data is going to be collected and monitored. Then you can really have a lot of conversations about protection, especially protection from retaliation, protection related to people who are new to the job and they don't know anything what's going on. So those are things are very, very important. And I don't think employers and designers of these wearables have intention that is to really prohibit people to get the job or use the data against them to get a new job. I don't think that is the intention at all. But I think we need to really be aware about all the kinds of privacy policies that protects us as workers across the spectrum of what these devices can do, safety and health, both, and also well-being. With the EEOC that was actually just issued this in December, is really just kind of an info sheet, and it gives a little bit of the employer's guide, as Ram said, but and it's really about the legal framework that is needed in terms of really protecting discrimination, and the ADA language is there. But really thinking through what employers needs to do, and employers must be aware that if they're collecting any kind of health-related data through wearables, they need to really make sure that it constitutes any kind of medical examination, disability inquiry, and they are really meeting what the requirements for Americans with Disability Act. But it's also the most important aspects of this discrimination protection is really looking to how this data collection is really allowed to look into only job-related and consistent with business necessity. So that's the language you use. And if it's job-related, and that's really kind of give the trigger to get the data. But I think employers need to be aware of that. Personal data outside of work environment is not part of what the Discrimination Act propose. And also employers needs to be mindful of any kind of violation regards to the existing anti-discrimination laws that we have. So, you know, we do have that, and we do need to ensure that it does not lead to extra discrimination from that. So in other words, to me, thinking about the human-centered perspective is this idea of saying who we are doing this for, who are benefiting from these wearables, and really looking across who is excluded from using this and benefiting from this. And that comes the equity issue about how to make sure that we are talking about the adoption of technology and be sensitive about people who are not able to use that technology. So that's the other issue to discuss.
Yeah, leading us into another topic. Just quickly before we pivot to equity, we've gotten a couple of questions from folks that are related more to security than to privacy, but people asking, you know, is there concern about attempts to hack these data sets, or, you know, get a hold of this data and then sell it? Is that a major concern, or is it really more on the privacy side?
I think the data breaching is the huge issue. You know, if you go back to a few years back, you know, I think it might not be related to workplace per se, but, you know, if you go back to the Cambridge Analytica, you know, the Facebook data, you know, with respect to the political stuff, that was a huge issue, and that's one of the things which I think when you are looking at a third-party developer or third-party, we need to have, say, if you're buying some shiny object to look at the worker's data, we need to have this solution provider giving all that information, including the data, you know, storage policies and, you know, what if scenarios as well. So that really, in my view, that's a great question, because it's a huge issue. And again, you know, that comment about the, you know, the cloud, yes, the data is in cloud doesn't mean that it's not, you know, not going to be, you know, tackled by hackers. So yeah, I mean, it's like somebody was saying that, you know, hey, what if I am on computer, if I'm collecting the data, so you don't even switch on the computer. And there was a joke that, you know, it's you know, that means you're not collecting the data, but so nobody's watching you, versus, you know. So again, wherever the data is, unfortunately, we have all these aspects of it, you know. people selling the data. Yes, again, going back to, I hate to go back to that, where researcher and, the worker or a study participant having one-to-one data. Yeah, and so nobody's, basically collecting the data other than the researcher or the ergonomist per se in the workplace. Now everything is, you are getting the wearable sensors from the outside. So that means you really don't know whether that data, whatever is being collected, is going to be sold to some third party, or a fourth party or whatever. So these are the huge issues which I think need to be not only we should be aware of as an employer, but also employee should be make evident that these are the policies we have in place in terms of what if scenarios. So that will help the worker. Again, I mean, I'm emphasizing worker because at the end of the day, you in a way monitor instance for a good performance, but also unfortunately going to the other side where you have lack of trust with respect to that data.
Yeah, and this could kind of perpetuate some of those dynamics. I wonder, Katya, if maybe we can kind of go back to your earlier point about equity. And it seems like these technologies and their data, like a lot of tech, right, could be used for a lot of different purposes. And they could either help advance equity, or there's also concern that it'll be hard to roll these out in an equitable way, right? They're going to cost money. You need people who are able to manage them, all of those kinds of considerations. What do you think about how wearables may impact equity in the workplace?
Yeah, I think that there is already issues regards to working conditions that can lead already to more inequity in the workplace. And so that's why I think when I present that framework of total worker health was with the intention to look across and really understand that the utilization of wearables needs to be looked and really understood from the point of view of safe and health and well-being for all. And that lens requires existing programs, existing policies, existing practice to consider what you have is already detrimental to equity in the workplace. So wearables is no different than many other safety practices that we see out there. Even they use simple use of PPE. We have PPEs available in the market that doesn't fit women and had issues about that. And so how we are making sure that we have more women represented in many industries right now that didn't happen before, how we are accounting for that population and not creating inequity on how people perform their work. And so there are issues about equal opportunities, I think, but also mainly about ensuring safe and healthy workplaces requires that there is a fairness, there is a respect and honesty and transparency that comes from that understanding. And I think the total health framework and the WHO healthy workplace framework has really solidified the understanding of how to really systematically look into working conditions that supports equity. And I do believe that we are not there yet. We still need to do a lot of awareness, especially with us professionals, with leaders in positions that can be decision makers on using that. There is the really amazing benefits that comes with these wearables, and we understand them, but we also need to understand who will be excluded from those benefits. And I just mentioned PPE because there's also a concern about exoskeleton use and the fit for women on this equipment. And so when we are concerned about that, we still have to take a step back and again ask the question about who will benefit from this technology. What are the concerns that we have for groups that are not part of that? That they're offering that adoption. And I see this with many things in safety. There's a lot of conversations around gamification and all that kind of thing that leads to a lot of questions about equity. And I'm a person who really think that each workplace has its own safety culture and safety way of bringing in changes. And that change has to be with the forefront idea of the core value should be benefiting everyone, do no harm to everyone. And so that's also part of how you can really utilize and select this technology really based on some criteria that you already have on consideration about which working conditions you are trying to improve with these wearables. And if you really find that these work conditions are difficult to change and there are different ways other than wearables, you should go for that. Because maybe wearables is not the solution. It's just one possibility. So I think that's how we can make sure that equity is met when we're thinking about adoption.
Mhm.
Rachel, can I add a few from my
Yeah,
side
please.
perspective? And I think Katya said a lot of good stuff, especially I think when she even started the presentation in terms of the inclusivity or the universal design aspect of it, that kind of addresses a lot of issues. But I think any, for any device or anything we use, we have, as you know, we have the pros and cons. Definitely educate the worker in terms of the benefits of this particular wearable sensors or the smart sensors. Again, having a use cases, do some pilot studies, and that show them that how they are being helpful. But at the same time, you need to have this accommodation, in terms of exceptions. We can't say that, okay, you need to have some exceptions in terms of your wearable policies. Whether it addressing the religious beliefs or your disabilities or pregnancy, you name it. And what if, so for example, that person, that the exception, then what are the, you need to offer the alternative options for these employees who cannot use wearable devices. That should be also be part of your policy, and so, I mean, definitely vet those wearable devices, for those accuracy issues, and also make sure that, or rather avoid any, employment decision-making process, with respect to just purely wearable data, and it should be that, the wearable policies should be across the workforce, and also as long as I mean, I think the buy-in from the worker in terms of, use cases, pilot studies, getting their input in terms of, because end of the day, they are the ones who are going to, wear it. And also do some regular audits, and check out any potential biases, in terms of the data collection and usage. And again, have a comprehensive, what do you call, a policy in place in terms of how you're storing the data, the privacy, and also the data breaching, all those, if you have that in place, that definitely will address workplace equity. I know we are going round and round in terms of the privacy, accuracy, and the way we collect the data, the way we educate the workers, but all these things are important at the workplace. So having some guidelines, or the policies in place will be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great point that these wearables are not going to be introduced in a vacuum, right? They're being introduced into an occupational setting where there's already an existing health and safety culture, and there's maybe some policies in place, and thinking about how you can integrate these in a way that goes along with, existing efforts to address equity or existing policies, I think is a great point, and gives people some really practical questions to think about in terms of implementation. I want to spend our last time talking a little bit about implementation. And we, to your point, Ram, have talked about a lot of these big ideas and questions and challenges. But for employers who are thinking about deploying wearables, what are some of the key questions that they should be asking before committing to using a wearable.
Can I do it, or you want to run? You want to go first? Or can I
Go
go
ahead,
first?
Katia, go ahead, please go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, I think there are many questions to think about this, but I think one of the one is that really having the full consent before employing them, and really asking the question about involving workers early on the decision-making process of having the wearables or not, the buy-in that Ron just talked about. The other thing is thinking about the second part that we just talked about is, do you have any flexible policies to allow people to really make their own decisions and judgment of the risks and the benefits? Because we've seen more and more that flexible policies that allow people to make their own judgment on when and where to use is the most effective way to use those devices. There will be issues of compliance if there is no such flexibility. And so you don't want to invest the money and then realize that people are not complying with anything because they didn't understand that it was a voluntary way of adopting this. And the other thing is, yeah, we do need to educate people and benefit, but the other question that we need to really think about is, do you offer training on the use and have the expertise to properly and safely analyze the data and store the data? If you don't have that expertise, you should not be thinking about adopting wearables. You should really hire the expertise to do that. The other question to ask is really, do you anticipate issues of any kind of data collection, especially with in terms of, and one particular issue that comes out in ergonomics as a practical issue is the idea of conducting risk assessments using that data and the validation of these motion sensors to detect poor behavior and postural behavior. So thinking about those motion sensors and how that can be a little bit, what I would say, too intimidating, but also can be difficult to understand the full spectrum of the conditions of the environment if the wearables are focused on just postural analysis. So the ones that really combine different data are much more accurate on looking to that. And that's where for risk assessment, there's a lot of conversations now about using some augmented reality and virtual reality instead of that, because that can give a little bit more environmental information when you're doing that data collection. The other thing is about asking yourself the questions, is any other things that you could do to reduce the risks and bringing solutions to prevent the accidents and fatalities? And I think, as I mentioned before, the use of wearables for preventing fatalities, especially collision, for transportation with the alertness of sleep, that is something that no one can deny. This is extremely useful for the industry and has been in the market now for a while. And the final question that I have is about thinking about, did you ensure that you comply with every single discrimination policies to protect workers from any type of discrimination? So I think this is my main questions, but I would comment later a bit on the overall kind of implementation frame and the strategy that employers can think about that. But I'll let Ron make his questions now.
Thank you, Katia. Just, maybe I'll flip it in a, different way. Yes, employers, especially when you're trying to implement these wearable sensors, the way first thing I look at is a lot of employers buy third-party stuff, right? That is where the biggest problem is. Not a problem, I should say, but yes, you as an employer, you don't have all the resources to make your own wearable sensors. But what you do is, you collect this, you get a third party involved, and then, are they adhering to any privacy and security standards? Okay, and do they have any safeguards in place? You know, the guardrails in place in terms of protecting the data from the the so-called vendors or the users. So those things definitely has to be in place before you bring in from an outside. You know, and then of course you need to employ. Do you have as an employer, you need to have that, you need to inform the employees about the rights regarding the technology usage. Also for the people who don't want to, and there shouldn't be any fear of retaliation. So that's one of the things too, because, you can't just say, wear it. And if you don't, then, we're going to look into your performance and all. So there needs to have a proper communication, in terms of the employee rights with the workers, and going back to again in terms of the compliance and the privacy issues with respect to the state where you are, and I think there was a study with respect to there's a lot of servers, especially the Microsoft servers are in Europe, especially in Ireland, so they have their own country regulations. So I'm just giving an example. I'm not an expert in that total regulatory side of it, but look at the country laws, look at the state laws or the federal laws of your own government. So those are the things you need to educate yourself, but also educate the employees as well. Have to have an informed consent. It mentioned all these that yes, how your data is being used. Yes, we are using it for your own benefit, but how is it being used, and how this can be beneficial. But if we can't have the other side in the sense of both pros and cons, it can be very difficult to have that implementation in place, because employee buy-in is very, very important if you want to have a proper ethical or workplace.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and just in our last couple minutes, and maybe we'll have time to take one or two more questions from the audience. So put those in the chat if you have any outstanding questions. Maybe we can just get your final thoughts on kind of how we think about implementing wearables in an ethical and effective way. And Katya, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I have something short and sweet to share. My thinking about implementation, I see implementation as a partnership. And a way to look at wearables is that, do you have your partnership in place to determine that the users of these devices will benefit from them? And do you have clear picture of its purpose in terms of results, especially in terms of the impact, if we're talking about prevention of accidents, injuries, and musculoskeletal disorders? If you are doing that, you have that partnership built, and you are asking the right questions, and you're considering who are your users, you're good to go. But I would say just the last little bit of it in terms of implementation in this partnership is the consideration that I mentioned early about safety culture. The aspects of safety that really matters the most has to be as priority. And so if that is going to be helpful in that safety framework of enhancing morale, enhancing job performance and compliance with behavior, then you're in the right direction to implement those devices.
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful way for people to think about this, and both kind of a simple directive and also one that's challenging sometimes to implement, but really good guidance. Ram, any closing thoughts on the implementation side?
Yeah, from my side, definitely, again, I go back to you need to have transparent policies, have some policies in terms of what are your data collection practices, how are you storing the data, what are the employee rights, and also informed consent, especially, how it's being used. Make sure, you need that, you are collecting only job-related data, consistent with your whatever the workplace regulations are, but you're not collecting the data off the work. That is important too. So again, only access, data access, you're talking about, who owns the data, who is accessing that particular data. That should be clear as well. going back to, again, what if the employee declines or, says, hey, I don't want to use it. You need to have certain policy as well. You don't, you can't have this retaliation aspect of it. Always, even in a workplace, as we know, audit is very, very important. If you can't, you need to have a proper audit, in terms of regular, I should say, periodical auditing of that, to check, the biases and, in terms of the data collection. Legal complaints, again, as I said, in terms of, Americans with Disability Act, you have title, I think, I forgot the exact number, but that's very important too. And also, as I think Katya alluded, have a training. If you just don't put a sensor and, yeah, okay, we are going to collect the data, have that, have some training programs to understand that, how to use this wearable data, because a lot of times, especially in the exoskeleton world, donning and doffing and, the data, sometimes the heat, what should I say, the battery life, and it heats, and it can be detrimental to the skin. So those are the things. And last but least, definitely, as someone pointed out, data breaching. So what are the data security policies? So all those things, definitely play an important element in terms of successful implementation.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's a really important point to emphasize. It's important to know the existing policy environment, and then also think about, organizational policies that could be used to help ensure that these are going to really be beneficial to workers and not threaten their autonomy or their privacy or other worker rights. Well, this has been a really fantastic conversation. I want to thank Katya and Ram so much for joining us today and for lending us their expertise, and for giving us so much practical guidance on how to think about implementing wearables. And I believe that we're going to have a survey that I think Casey will put in the chat. And so it'd be great if you could fill that out. That'll be really helpful for us going forward as we plan more of these webinars. But thank you so much to all of you and to our panelists for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, Casey. Thank you,
Thank you, the
Katya.
center, for inviting us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, the audience too.
Thank you.